Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Always in Season podcast, episode number 11. This week, we're going to just kind of start a new thing. We're going to just break down every division and just kind of do like a deeper dive into each division for the next couple weeks.
Yeah.
But first of all, we're going to just go through our weekly news like we do every week.
For sure. The Chargers and wide receiver Ladd McConkey reached a 4-year deal, and it was the most guaranteed money for a 34th pick in NFL history. I think that was kind of wild. Like, that was a historic contract.
Yeah, I mean, McConkey, when he was drafted, I mean, there was a lot of comparisons to Cooper Kupp, which, it's just funny why he's compared to Cooper Kupp. But I think a real possible target for Justin Herbert this upcoming year, obviously they don't have the weapons that he had last year. So hopefully McConkey can make an impact early.
Yeah, for sure. Hard Knocks in season will feature the AFC North, which is the division we're breaking down first today. So the Browns, the Ravens, the Steelers, and the Bengals. I'm really excited for that, a whole division.
Yeah, I mean, going through like this division this week, I just think this division is going to be so much fun this year. I mean, 3 of the 4 teams made the playoffs last year, and the one team that didn't was just injured. So I think it'll be a dogfight for the whole division, and it's cool to see that Hard Knocks is going to be covering all of them.
Yeah, it's been a couple of years now that this division has just been, gritty and hard-fought and just a close race, and so that debuts on December 3rd. Meanwhile, Brandon Ayuk was on FaceTime with Jaden Daniels. He kind of vlogged it, or his girl vlogged it or something. It was on TikTok and everything, and he was saying, they don't want me. They said they don't want me. So that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, there were, a lot of rumors a couple weeks ago, I would think more towards the draft, that they might move on from him and maybe Debo, but I'm not really surprised that they're moving on from Ayuk. But again, this is all big kind of a rumor. We don't know where this is going to go, but it's just something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and it's a wild way to announce it, but now everyone's just speculating where will he go next. The Madden 99 Club was revealed. Christian McCaffrey, he is the cover of Madden, so it makes sense that he's 99 rating. And then Patrick Mahomes, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, and Travis Kelce are the other members of the 99 Club.
I mean, not really surprised. Kind of the guys you expected. I was a little shocked at Tyreek, I'm going to be honest. I mean, obviously he's still one of the best, but very, very, I feel like the 99 Club is a very special club, and no disrespect to Tyreek, but I just don't think he's 99.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's fair. But also, we know, the top 10 quarterbacks, and there's been some argument about, is that list accurate,
Right.
But the thing is that I think people tend to forget is, one, it's kind of like the Pro Bowl. It can tend to be a year late, a year after their great season. Also, Madden, there's the adjustments throughout the season. Yeah. Tony Jefferson, he is coming out of retirement to return to the Chargers. He also played with the Ravens for a time. That's a big deal coming out of retirement, so he must have really wanted to just help this Chargers team.
Yeah, I mean, the Chargers kind of need help wherever they can get it. I think Harbaugh probably has a big reason to do with it. I think the guys are excited to play for him, and rare to see a guy come out of retirement, but I think he, like you said, he's ready to help this Chargers team.
For sure. Also, the NFL ruled the Falcons had improper contact with Kirk Cousins, Darnell Mooney, and Charlie Warner prior to the 2024 league year. Atlanta will forfeit a 2025 fifth-round pick and pay $250,000 fine, and then GM Terry Fontenot has been fined $50,000, so costly.
Yeah, but I think it's not like the NBA, where it's the NBA tampers almost immediately. There's really not much penalty for tampering. The NFL's different. There was a lot of speculation of Kirk going to the Falcons because his wife is from there and everything, but again, they got their quarterback, but they're gonna have to pay a price tag. So. A little bit more news, just kind of a small one. T. Higgins officially signed his extension. Still some speculation with Jamar Chase, I think. Keeping those guys around for Joe Burrow. I mean, we'll break down the Bengals a little bit more later. But another big one is we know that Rodgers was absent at training camp, and it was rumored he's on another ayahuasca retreat.
Yeah, I'm not sure how accurate these rumors are or where we're getting the information from, but it was put out there, and I wouldn't put it past him to be on this retreat, but no matter where he was, he's not at the mini camp, and that's kind of wild.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to see that he really hasn't changed much, and this is supposedly more important than training camp, which, to each their own, I guess. But
or at least mini camp.
Yeah. So this is just kind of shows where his head is at, and I mean he has a lot to prove, I guess, but it's interesting.
And I do think he wants to be there for the Jets. Like, I think he's excited about the season. It's just more about like that leadership and actions speak louder than words.
Yeah.
So.
And then the big one, the final one, Trevor Lawrence finally got his payday. He got a massive extension for the Jaguars. A guy that hasn't done really anything, no disrespect. I get he's been hurt and it's just been, kind of whatever. But it's the harsh reality of, like, if you think your quarterback's at least okay, you kind of got to give him the money.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I have mixed feelings about this contract because I think he's shown talent. Yep. I think he's shown, how far his ceiling can go and whatnot. But like you said, he hasn't done much. He's won a playoff game. It was against the Chargers, and it was like where they came back from down 24-0 or whatever. But the thing is, I feel like when you pay your quarterback, you're saying we'd rather have you. We don't think we're gonna get anybody else better than you, whether that's in free agency or the draft next year. And I think, and I respect that, and I like Trevor Lawrence, and I think he can have a bright future. But that's a boatload of money to pay him. I don't think personally, he has not lived up to the number one overall pick standards, in my opinion. But I don't know. I'm happy for him, and hopefully he can prove the doubters wrong and prove the Jags right.
Yeah, I think this contract, it was just a lot. It's obviously a lot of money, but then you have guys like Jordan Love, who's just sitting there waiting for his extension. What kind of money is he going to get? But like you said, I don't think Lawrence has lived up to the hype at all for a first overall pick, at least. In Clemson, he was phenomenal at Clemson, but he hasn't really shown much. And hopefully this year he can get over that hump and show that he's worth the price tag. That whole division is, you call it the baby brother division because everybody's young. Will Levis, Anthony Richardson, Trevor Lawrence, like these guys are young. But again, we'll see. And kind of a weaker division, but I feel like it's anybody's division.
They're an up and coming division. Obviously, people are high on the Texans right now, but the Colts are like a huge unknown because Richardson, showed some, but it was so fast, But I don't know. I'm excited to say that division, and congrats to Trevor Lawrence. And this is no disrespect. Like, I have the same feeling about like Justin Herbert getting paid. Who I love Justin Herbert. I love his game. I think he's easy to root for. All of that, but he hasn't done anything, so it's really bold to pay these guys, but also understand it because you don't want to let that kind of talent walk out of your building.
Yeah. So I think that's it for the weekly news. Like you said, we're going to break down the AFC North this week, so let's get into it.
Yeah. All right, so now we're going to jump into the AFC North division, and we're going to start off with the Bengals since they finished last in their division last year. Do you want to go?
Yeah, they finished 9-8 last year. They did miss the playoffs. Like Susanna said, they finished 4th. So kind of a disappointing year for them. But again, the biggest thing was Joe Burrow was not healthy.
Yeah, their offensive rank overall was 22nd. Their defensive rank was 31st, and their special teams rank was 16th.
Yeah, offensively, they could not run the ball. They finished second last in yards per game. Passing yards, they were kind of mediocre even without Burrow. They finished 15th. Point again, they were just kind of in the middle for everything. 16th in points and kind of towards the back of the field for total yards per game. But again, just kind of a disappointing year and one of those years that just injuries happened and nothing they could really do.
Yeah, and I think because of why, like the reasons behind it being disappointing, I think they're not too worried about it. I'm not saying that they're not like concerned about the season or trying, but like I think they understand. All right, we were hit with injuries, but we're still a great team. So we'll just go over some of the changes that they've had between last season and this upcoming season. So new additions to the coaching staff. Jordan Salkin, offensive assistant. He previously worked as an offensive analyst at the University of Oregon, and then also an offensive quality control coach for the Dolphins back in 2021. Ronnie Regula, defensive assistant. He has 9 years of collegiate coaching experience, and then also was a senior defensive analyst at Notre Dame, 2022 to 2023. And then last but not least, Ben Jacobs, special teams assistant.
Yeah, these are all kind of like, again, under the radar. I wouldn't say under the radar, but not really ones you pay attention to. So it sounds like a lot of them are coming from college, but so it'll be interesting to see how they change over from college to the pros.
Yeah, it might help the rookies, get acclimated, and just in general, just a lot of football experience there. And then key losses for the coaching staff is Brian Callahan.
That's a big one, yeah. We'll see how they respond with him gone, but I think the biggest loss for them for sure.
Yeah. And then they have some new additions of players. Obviously, the draft, we won't go over all of them. They did focus on the defensive side of the ball. Their first-round pick was an offensive tackle and Amarius Mims, so making sure Joe Burrow doesn't get hurt again. But then, it was mostly defensive tackles and DNs, safeties, corners, all of that.
Yeah, I mean, defensively, they were just horrendous last year. 28th in passing, 26th in rushing, and 31st in just total yards. So they couldn't really stop anything.
Yeah.
So they attacked what they needed to in the draft.
Yeah, and then they also made some additions in free agency. So Mike Gesicki, Geno Stone, Zach Moss, Sheldon Rankings, Trent Brown. Did you have anyone else?
No, I think that those were the big ones. Zach Moss obviously is the big change at the running back position, but I think Gesicki having another weapon for Burrow, and then Geno Stone, they got him from Baltimore. So hopefully he's going to be a great addition for their secondary because they need it.
Yeah, and I think Gesicki is also really going to help that run game because he's a really good blocking tight end. And then key losses when it comes to players. So Nick Scott and Joe Mixon are some big ones, as well as DJ Reader, Jonah Williams, Irv Smith, and Chidobe Awuzie. So those are some big losses.
Names. Mixon, I think we just kind of expected him. He was rumored like he was going to return, and then they just traded him.
Yeah.
So a big loss for them. A guy, he's been there for a couple years, but I don't think he's the biggest one. I think DJ Reader is a big one. That's a big loss for them.
I think Jonah Williams is also pretty big.
So definitely a lot of big names that they lost and that they got, but like we said earlier, I think the division will be interesting. And even though the Bengals finished fourth, I think they have a real shot this year.
Yeah. And for their schedule difficulty for 2024, it's really looking good for them compared to the rest of their division.
Yeah.
They have the 17th toughest schedule, so middle of the pack. We looked at their schedule, and it's pretty up and down the whole season. They'd have that one tough stretch. It's, like middle of November to beginning of December. They have the Ravens and the Chargers. They have a bye week, and then they have the Steelers and the Cowboys.
Yeah, I mean, if that's your toughest stretch, I think you're looking pretty good.
Yeah.
But again, they finished fourth in the division, so that helps them as far as their schedule goes. But like you said, 17th for the schedule, they have a lot of help in that area. But just overall, I think the Bengals, they've shown that they can be there. They've been to a Super Bowl. Joe Burrow has beaten Mahomes in an AFC championship, which is not easy to do.
Yeah.
But I just think there's a lot of optimism for them. And they attacked what they need to defensively, and I think they're very promising going into next year.
And I think Zach Taylor has solidified himself as one of the better head coaches in the league. I think he's becoming more and more respected as time goes on. Definitely one of the better offensive minds in the league, and also, I mean, it's just about staying healthy for them, right? Now, the losses that they had are big, and so we'll have to see how these rookies can step up as well as the free agent players, but I think they're still feeling like they have some good promise for this season.
Yeah, I think that's it for the Bengals, so we're going to move into the Steelers now.
All right, so now we're going to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers, who had way more changes than the Bengals did. What did they do last year?
Last year they went 10-7, lost in the wild card to Buffalo. That was kind of the one that got postponed because of all the snow. So a really cold and difficult place to play in Buffalo. They finished third in the division, but like you said, they had a lot of changes.
Yeah, their offensive rank for last year was 25th. Their defensive rank was 21st, and special teams was 15th. So middle to below average season. Still made the playoffs, like you said. Probably credit to Mike Tomlin.
Yeah.
But yeah, they really did have some changes. But what else? What were more specific ranks for them?
Offensively, I mean, the Steelers really haven't, at least since they lost Big Ben, they haven't really found anybody to have like a solid offensive piece. So like you said, they were 25th in passing, 13th in rushing, so kind of a little bit better in the rushing aspect of it. But defensively, they were kind of lower than I expected for as good as their defense was. But they got better on both sides of the ball.
They really did. To talk about some of their changes, so additions to the coaching staff, offensive coordinator is now Arthur Smith. He was previously the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons for 3 years, and he was hired as the Steelers' offensive coordinator for 2024. That's a big addition. I mean, I know people have mixed opinions on Arthur Smith, but that's still like a huge addition at head coach to your staff.
Yeah, I think there was offensively the Steelers. They were just not. I know their fans were not happy with the offense last year, and having a guy that in Arthur Smith, having a head coach as a coordinator. Some guys are meant to be head coaches, some guys are not. I don't think Arthur Smith really was, but I think it's going to help tremendously, especially with Tomlin still being the coach there.
Yeah, and I think the fit with Arthur Smith and Falcons just never meshed. I think he'll be able to be rejuvenated here, and even if he doesn't ever become a head coach again, he might become one of the better coordinators in the league. They also have a new quarterbacks coach, Tom Arth. He's replacing Mike Sullivan, who was moved to senior offensive assistant. And Arth previously worked for the Chargers as their passing game specialist, so obviously knows the quarterback position well. He can help both of their new quarterbacks. Wide receivers coach, Zach and Susanna, he was hired, and then their offensive assistant, Mateo Kumbai. So it's big to add an offensive assistant. I think that really helps Arthur Smith out. Especially with Mike Tomlin being a defensive-minded head coach, it's really good to have those additions to the
I mean, they had a lot of offensive changes, and hopefully, like you said, Tomlin can focus on his defense that he always has ready to go, and having a new offensive assistant and offensive coach or coordinator really gives them a better shot offensively, which I think they've just been missing for the past couple of years.
For sure. And then their key loss was Glenn Thomas. He went back to college ball. But then for additions of players, I mean, in the draft, I think they had a pretty darn good draft. Their number one overall pick was Troy Fontenot out of Washington, who was, I mean, highly looked at going into the draft. They really did bolster up their offensive line. And then, also added to the defense. They honestly hit kind of all their key positions. But then their additions in free agency are the highlights. So Russell Wilson, Cameron Johnston, Patrick Queen, Justin Fields, Dante Jackson, Miles Killebrew, Deshaun Elliott, Montravius Adams. I mean, come on now.
Yeah, they had a great free agency, and I don't know how in the world we let Patrick Queen get on the Steelers, but I don't know. That defense is going to look even better than they did, and obviously their quarterback room is way different. Rudolph and Trubisky are gone, and Russell Wilson and Justin Fields are in.
Yeah, that's a major upgrade at both the starting and the backup position. Now, they did have some key losses. So, Levy Wallace, James Pierce, Armand Watts, Mykal Walker, like you said, Mason Rudolph, Marcus Golden, and then Blake Martinez and Quan Alexander. Those three guys, Golden, Martinez, and Alexander, are still free agents out there.
Yeah.
And then Miles Boykin. So, they weren't like the big names, but they were like kind of key role players, helped flesh out that roster, but I think they still managed.
Yeah, they seem to have lost depth there. But I think some of those guys, like Martinez and Quan Alexander, they're kind of getting to the point where like they're not really going to find another team probably. So the losses were, I guess they were crucial, but I think the additions drastically outweigh the losses.
For sure. And then for their schedule difficulty, they have the third toughest schedule in the NFL. I mean, this division was hit hard when it comes to schedule difficulty. That just sucks. It's just kind of how it plays out. But what do you think?
Again, the Steelers played that rough, tough football that the AFC North has been known for. Third in the division, even though they finished third in the division, they still have a tough schedule. What are some tough games or tough stretches that they have?
Well, I think their first game is really interesting because they have the Falcons, and like we talked about, Arthur Smith came from the Falcons, and then we have a new quarterback on both teams. We believe Russell Wilson will be the starter for the Steelers for at least week 1, and then Kirk Cousins for the Falcons, and so new quarterbacks, new teams. I'm really excited for that matchup. But then as you kind of look down the stretch, it is kind of up and down, I would say. Until November, then they have the Ravens, they have the Browns, they have the Bengals, they have the Browns, they have the Eagles. So they have division matchups, and then a tough NFC opponent, and then they have the Ravens again, and then the Chiefs, and then the Bengals. Like, once middle of November
Ravens,
hits...
Chiefs, Bengals?
Ravens, Chiefs, Bengals.
Oof.
So once Eagles, Ravens, Chiefs, Bengals.
Ooh.
I mean, once the middle of November hits, they better have clicked. They better figure it out and get ready for it. I mean, those are not just tough teams; they're physical teams.
Yeah.
I mean,
how many of those games are at home?
Yeah, so
just in that
starting with
stretch.
the Eagles. So the Eagles is an away game. The Ravens is an away game. Chiefs is a home game. Bengals is a home game.
Chiefs at home. That's big. That's important. That's good for them that they're not going to Arrowhead.
That's a Christmas game.
Okay. But yeah, I think that's a tough stretch.
That's a really tough stretch.
Yeah. So I mean, even though third in the division, that's just not really that easy.
Yeah. So really, they have the easier beginning. Get them in their groove. Maybe get them some wins to stack up, so that if they drop a few losses in this tough stretch, still be okay. Obviously, with Mike Tomlin as your coach, it's like you never have a losing season, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Steelers, they're in for it this year, but I think they got some additions. They will definitely be tested, like you said, later on. But this is a division, I think I've said it before, that I think it's anybody's division.
Yeah, I agree. I just really like the fight in this division. I love that Hard Knocks is focusing on this division. Do you think that Russell Wilson will be the starting quarterback for the whole season?
I don't know. I think if he slips up for like a couple weeks in a row, there's a chance they could just see what they have in Fields, because Fields is in a contract year, and I think Fields has a lot to prove too. He's looking for a contract next year. I think he'll get one. I don't think it'll be with the Steelers because he doesn't want to be a backup, but hopefully the Russell Wilson experiment pans out for the Steelers. But if it doesn't, I don't think they're going to hesitate to throw Fields in there.
Yeah, and I hope for Russell Wilson's sake that he does really just kind of take this opportunity and run with it, because like we've talked about, his situation with the Broncos seemed unfair.
Right.
I think he still has a lot left in the tank, but it'll be interesting. With having a solid backup, it always has that conversation of, what if they start to struggle, you know? But with that tough stretch, I'd rather have Russell Wilson as my quarterback than Justin Fields. So that's it for the Steelers.
Yeah,
right?
that's it for the Steelers. I think we're going to move in next to the Browns.
All right, so now we're going to do a deep dive into the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, their 2023 record, they went 11-6. They lost the wild card to the Texans, 45-14. Their defense did not show up in the playoffs. The big notes, I guess, is Deshaun Watson hopefully is finally being healthy.
Yeah, I think Deshaun Watson should be healthy. I'm expecting a good season from him.
And then Nick Chubb, he had the brutal knee injury week 2 last year, so hopefully he bounces back.
Yeah, for sure. They're expecting big things from Nick Chubb. Their offensive rank last year was 16th, but then their defensive rank was 1st. Their special teams rank was 12th, so middle to above average, and then obviously their defense was the best, so hopefully that continues for them.
Yeah, with Flacco there offensively, they weren't horrible offensively, like you said, they're kind of middle of the road, 19th in passing, 12th in rushing, 10th in points, but defensively they were 1st in passing yard, 1st in total yards, so they really leaned on their defense, and that defense didn't show up, like I said, in the playoffs.
I mean, losing your QB1 and your running back 1, that is brutal, so... but they did have some changes. They actually had bigger changes to the coaching staff than they did players. But so their key additions to their coaching staff were like Ken Dorsey. He previously was with the Browns from 2006 to 2008. And he really has experience with versatile offenses. So I think with Deshaun Watson being that like dual threat kind of quarterback will be really helpful. Tommy Rees was hired as tight ends coach. He had previously been the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach at Alabama, so good school. And then Deuce Staley was hired as the running backs coach, and then Jackie Sticiar was hired as the defensive line coach. Yeah,
that's just a lot of new faces from. I think Ken Dorsey was the big one. The offense, I think they need to definitely be better. But like you said, you lost your QB1, lost your running back 1. It's kind of hard to just adjust to that midseason.
Yeah, and then they had a big loss for coaching staff. Alex Van Pelt, offensive coordinator. Alex Van Pelt is pretty highly regarded around the league, so that was tough. And then T.C. McCartney was the tight ends coach who, like we said, was replaced. Stump Mitchell was their running backs coach, and Bill Callahan was their line coach. So they obviously made the replacements, and I think they made good replacement choices. But still tough to lose those. We'll see how the replacements do, I guess.
Yeah, I think Stefanski this last year he solidified himself as the Browns finally found their coach. I mean, I loved Stefanski when he got there, and last year with everything that was changing, he got the team to the playoffs.
Yeah, he's won Coach of the Year a couple years back, and I mean, I think everyone knows that like he is their coach, and then Andrew Berry, the GM. I mean, he has done his job. Now it's just a matter of, all right, can they stay healthy, especially Deshaun, and let's see, like, can they make a playoff run? Even if they don't make it to the Super Bowl, can they make a playoff run? Now, their draft was kind of mid. They didn't have as many picks. It was really more just kind of like adding depth to their roster kind of deal. But then they added some key players, I would say, like Tyler Huntley. I mean, honestly, I think that's a good backup quarterback to add. And they added Cade York, kicker. And then they also added Jordan Hicks and Nyheim Hines. They added Devin Bush. I mean, you go down the list. They added some big ones. You've talked about Jameis Winston, also a quarterback. That's another really good backup to have. So they did make some good additions. Again, it was more of like bolstering the roster as opposed to like, oh, he's our guy kind of thing, but I think it's helpful.
Yeah, like you said, they didn't have a lot of draft picks to kind of get much as far as like starters or really impactful players, but they got depth in the draft and in free agency. But like you said, I think they're optimistic offensively for this year, and defensively they don't really need to change much.
Yeah, they did have, I would say, more like 2 or 3 key losses. Sion Takitaki is a linebacker, as well as Anthony Walker Jr., the linebacker, and then quarterback Joe Flacco. I think those were their biggest losses. The other ones were more just like rotation guys, but Joe Flacco obviously did really well for them, but I do think they made good backup quarterback decisions.
Yeah, I think Flacco, I mean, he surprised everybody last year when he came out, won Comeback Player of the Year, showed that he still has it.
Yeah.
And I think he rejuvenated his career. A couple years he's got left, it looks like. But like you said, they moved on from him, but they filled in the backup quarterback pretty nicely.
For sure. I do think Takitaki was like their biggest loss. He really was a pretty consistent, steady, reliable player for their defense, but hopefully their defense is number one. That was not just because of one player. Now, their schedule difficulty for 2024, they have the toughest schedule in the league. That sucks for them, but at least they should be healthier this year. Yeah. They do have kind of a tough stretch just starting November 3rd, I would say. But I think their end of the season is where it gets the toughest. They have kind of easier games, like 3 of the first 4 weeks. Kind of where it's like, okay, they have like a finite amount of time to get their groove. Yeah. But then they need to be on it because, like we've talked about, with this division being so competitive, they can't slip.
Yeah, I think every team needs to have that stretch where it's like, hopefully for a lot of teams, it's early on where it's like, okay, we need to get in a groove. Yeah. Their bye week is, week 10, I think you said. So I think it messes with teams when you have an early bye week, you can't get into a groove. But like you said, toughest schedule, so there's really no margin for error for them.
Yeah, I do think week 10 bye week is beneficial. It's that middle ground, and especially because by that time you're gonna have some injuries, even if they're smaller ones. All right, that guy has an ankle sprain, all right, he can rest. He'll be back for next week, kind of deal. So yeah, I think their bye week is favorable, but their schedule is tough. Like they have Steelers, Chiefs, Bengals, Dolphins, Ravens as a stretch. I mean, that's a lot of talent that they're playing against. A lot of speed, I would say. So.
Yeah, I mean, this Browns team, for years they were just so bad. They couldn't. They went 0-16 one year. So finally something good to look forward to as a Browns fan. Yeah. And even though they have the toughest schedule, hopefully that they'll be healthy and they'll be ready to go.
Yeah, and I think last year would have been a really good year for them if Watson and Chubb had stayed healthy. So I'm really looking forward to this season. Obviously, I think Watson's a bigger unknown. I think Chubb, obviously we don't know how he'll come back from a knee injury. That's a tough injury to come back from as a running back, but they're talking really highly about Chubb. They seem to feel like he has a lot of promise going into this season. So I'm really excited, and hopefully their defense can keep that number 1 ranking.
Yeah, so I think that's it for the Browns. The only team left is the Baltimore Ravens.
Alrighty, so now we've got the Baltimore Ravens, who were the best team in the division last year.
Yeah, they went 13-4 last year. They did lose in the AFC Championship to the Chiefs 17-10. It was a close game, but again, the Chiefs, a team that some people can't seem to figure out.
It's their kryptonite.
Yeah.
Their offensive rank was 6th, their defensive rank was 6th, and their special teams rank was 8th. I mean, they were really, really good last year. Obviously, Lamar won the MVP. I mean, they were super talented team, but they have some changes from last season to the season, and they're rough changes.
Yeah. I mean, offensively, they first in rushing yards per game, 156 a game. Again, with Lamar, that's what you're going to get. Yeah. Passing yards 21st, total yards 6th. So very solid offensively. Defensively, they were first in points per game, 16.5 points per game, which I was surprised about. 6th in passing yards, 14th in rushing yards. So again, kind of middle of the field, but I think a lot to be proud about.
Wait. Their offense was most in points per game, or their defense?
They're defensively points per game. They
allowed.
allowed the fewest points per game.
That makes sense. Yeah. So to get into some of their changes, their coaching additions were just position groups. So Mark DeLoyne, inside linebackers, Dennis Johnston, defensive line coach, Doug Mallory, D-backs coach, and then Travell Wharton, assistant offensive line coach. So again, just kind of routine hires, whatnot. But they had a key loss for their coach, associate head coach and defensive line coach Anthony Weaver, and then defensive backs coach Jennard Wilson. I think the headline there is Anthony Weaver.
Yeah, I think every team loses every team loses some sort of big coach, and Anthony Weaver was the one for the Ravens. Mm-hmm. So again, we'll see how they go into next year, but they had just so many moving pieces on I think both coaches and players.
Yeah, and then for their draft, they really were equal of hitting offense and defense. Their number 1 overall pick was Nate Wiggins, who was picked 30, cornerback out of Clemson. But then their free agency, I mean, the big one was Derrick Henry. Yeah. That's the highlight. Yeah. And they have Josh Jones, Chris Board, and Kadar Hollman. Yeah,
Derrick Henry, I think everybody saw that, and their running game with Lamar and Derrick Henry is one that teams are going to, I think, have trouble with all season to figure out.
Yeah. Now, their key losses for players, I mean, it's rough. So Kevin Zeitler and John Simpson, last year's leader in touchdown, Gus Edwards, and leader in interceptions, Geno Stone. The second leading tackler, Patrick Queen, and just to highlight, Geno Stone and Patrick Queen both went elsewhere in the division. Yeah. Clowney and Darby left in free agency, joining the Panthers and Jaguars respectively. Clowney was the second leading quarterback sacker, and then they also lost Odell Beckham Jr. and traded their starting right tackle, Morgan Moses. Those are massive changes.
Yeah. They also lost Devin Duvernay also.
Yeah, so, Devin Duvernay.
But yeah, I think the biggest one is, Patrick Queen and Geno Stone. Just, guys that...
Even Gus Edwards.
Yeah, Gus Edwards too. Just guys that are so crucial. Like you said, Patrick Queen is arguably one of the best linebackers in football. They took a hit, on both sides of the ball.
Every name, Clowney, Morgan Moses.
Yeah.
Those.
So they're gonna have some trouble keeping the division title, I think.
Yeah, and to move on with trouble, they have the second toughest schedule in the league. So they're feeling better than the Browns, but that's about it. I mean, that sucks.
Yeah, this division just in general is a dogfight, and the Ravens are not getting really help anywhere,
Yeah, and I'm going to just humor y'all for a second. Let me just read off their schedule. They start off with the Chiefs. So you already look at your schedule and you're like, I don't want to play this season. Then they have the Raiders. Then they have the Cowboys, the Bills, the Bengals. Then they have the Commanders and the Buccaneers. Then they have the Browns and the Broncos, the Bengals, the Steelers. Then here it is. Chargers, Eagles, Giants, Steelers, Texans, Browns.
That first couple weeks, I don't know, it's brutal. It is brutal. They have to somehow find their groove there. But again, I think it's one of those situations if they come out of that stretch, above 500, only losing a game or two, they are feeling pretty confident.
The Buccaneers are looking as one of their easier teams, and they were a playoff team last year and probably improved. That's tough. They have a hiccups, but like in a good way. But they're not easy.
No,
I mean,
no.
this is a tough schedule. I don't know, and this is a tough division, like we've talked about.
I think they really need to. Lamar needs to be better, like you said. He looks better. He looks faster. We'll see what Derrick Henry has left in the tank, but they really need to find some form of offense with those two. They need to rely on those two because defensively they took a hit.
Derrick Henry has to return to King Henry standards.
If they want a chance.
He really does. Yeah. And their defense did take a hit. I think their special teams is solid, and not many know this, but because it's really rare. John Harbaugh, he's a special teams guy.
Yeah.
Usually, a coach is offensive or defensive minded. He's special teams. And obviously they have one of the best kickers in the league. But I don't know. This is a brutal schedule, brutal losses, and let's just hope those few key additions they made are big enough to keep them at least in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think having John Harbaugh there. Just having that consistency there for so many years has been important. A guy that really gets along well with Lamar, and I think he's going to be tested this year. The whole team is. Yeah,
they really are. And I mean, like we've talked about, their division is tough, but then just looking at the AFC as a whole, I mean, you have the Texans, the Titans and Colts and Jaguars are like, who knows how good they're going to be. And then the Jets are also one of those like unknowns, but people have promise. And then the Bills and the Dolphins, the Chiefs, the Chargers, all of them are going to be in that competition. So they have a tough road.
There's only so many playoff spots.
Exactly. They're not adding another one this year.
Right.
So.
I don't know. It's the division, the AFC in general is just going to be brutal. I don't know. Do you have anything else as far as the Ravens?
The more we break down this division, the more excited I am for Hard Knocks.
But Hard Knocks, great division to cover it. But I think that's it for the AFC North. I think a division that we're excited about. And I think next week we're going to get into the AFC South. I think the division you call the Baby Brother division.
Yeah, a lot of young quarterbacks, some new head coaches, and a lot of fun.
Yeah, so we'll see you guys next week.